Keep it on KHOW to keep up with what matters. Ross Kaminsky now, Martino at 10 on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW. This is the Ross Kaminsky Show. Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, I am just so pleased to go to our VIP line and talk for the very first time with Jolon Clark, who is the newly elected president of the Denver City Council. I don't mean newly elected to office, but newly selected to be president of this city council. Hey, Jolon, good morning. It's so great to have you here for the first time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Hey, before we jump into issues and stuff, tell my listeners a little bit about you. What part of the city do you represent, and a little bit about your own personal background and interests?
Yeah, sure. I represent District 7 in Denver, which roughly goes from Downing to Federal and from 6th Avenue to our southern city limit, so Yale or Dartmouth-ish, depending on where you are. That's roughly the part of town. Wash Park, Ruby Hill, Platt Park, Athmar Park. That's the area of Denver that I represent. And as far as me, I was born and raised in Denver. My parents bought their first house in East Wash Park, 700 block of South High Street, in 1969 for $10,500. And
I hope they still have it.
They do. They'll be celebrating 50 years in their home this year.
Wow.
So raised a family of 5. I'm the fourth of 5 kids, and grew up in Denver, Denver public school kid. I'm actually an environmental educator by training. Got my undergraduate degree in natural resources from Colorado State University. Have a master's in nonprofit management from Regis University, and I worked for a nonprofit called the Greenway Foundation, taking kids on field trips, doing environmental education, helping raise money and do planning for parks along the South Platte River and other waterways in Denver before I ended up on the city council, which I was elected to in 2015.
Excellent. Okay, and one last sort of broad question, and this is probably not as specific as it might be, but if we were going to create a range of political philosophy from liberal to conservative, and let's call the low numbers liberal. So 1, we'll say, is Bernie Sanders, and 10 is Mike Pence. Where are you?
I'm pretty low on that scale. That's an interesting question. Nobody's asked me to rank myself in there, but I'm definitely probably a 2 or a 3 on that scale.
Okay, good. Appreciate that answer, and just so my listeners understand where everybody is. And for me, I'm kind of libertarian. It's hard to rate myself, but I'd probably put myself, if I had to, since I made you answer the question, if I were going to answer the same way for myself, I'd probably say a 7. Something like that. Okay,
good to know.
I want to start with a relatively new story, but something that fits very much into your interests and something that you are thinking about. I don't want to say you're pushing. You can tell me if you are. I don't really know. Potential ban in Denver on certain plastic items, maybe bags, maybe straws. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, right now there is nothing that Denver can do immediately because there is a state law on the books from 1978, 1979 that expressly prohibits municipalities from banning any type of plastic. So as the law stands right now, we could not do that. So we aren't digging into it in a way that, hey, there's imminent legislation, because we can't. But that I think it is likely that, I think for sure a bill will be introduced, and I think that it is likely that it will pass at the State House this year that will maybe not fully repeal that law, but open the door for not a statewide ban necessarily, but for municipalities to have local control over that. And so a couple things that there are many members of council who are interested in pursuing, although, again, we haven't gone through much process yet on it because of the state hurdle, are bans on single-use plastics like plastic bags and straws. So I think if that bill is in fact introduced, if it does pass, I think then you'll see the Denver City Council take up a discussion about, at a minimum, plastic bags and probably single-use plastic straws.
What is the purpose of banning? Let's talk about straws in particular, because it's come up on the show a couple of times with some other places having done it. What is the thought process to say we need to ban plastic straws, single-use plastic straws?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a big picture, we are starting to see the impact of plastics globally, where they're, even plastics that are now in fibers and clothing that are ending up in our waterways, they're ending up in our drinking water, these microplastics, where they're ending up in fish that we're consuming. So it is having an effect globally on our environment and on us, on people. And so I think part of it is looking at how do we start to look differently at, especially these single-use plastics, these things that are used for a total of 5 minutes, and then they just end up in the landfill. Straws is again a different issue than bags. Real quick, I'll take a step back and talk about bags. We just toured. We took a lot of city council members and toured our landfill, our recycling center, and our compost facility, because in Denver we have a 3-bin system. And, I would encourage anybody who has never done that to do that, because it is an eye-opening experience to see what happens to the things that we kind of forget about the second we put them in one of those 3 bins. But the number one menace at both our landfill and our recycling center is plastic bags. Now, plastic bags are recyclable, but not through a single stream system like we have at the city. You have to take them somewhere where that is only dealing with them, because otherwise they get stuck in the system, they get stuck in the machinery. It shuts the whole recycling center down for hours at a time sometimes. And so they were talking about what a menace they were. At the landfill, the bags, get picked up by the wind. They are blowing all around and create a huge litter problem, which, there's almost not a block in Denver you can't walk around, look up in the trees, and see at least one plastic bag that is stuck up there. So, I think that those are but back to straws, I think these are items that...
Wait, hold on. Before you go back to straws, let me just Yeah. So at the supermarket level then, in plastic bags, are you thinking, if you got your way, would we most be looking at paper bags or reusable bags?
In a perfect world, we get to reusable bags, but I think that with a paper bag, which is still a single-use consumable, it is compostable, it is recyclable. There are a lot of things that we can do with that resource in a sustainable way that can continue to happen for generations, where a plastic is much harder to do that, the time that it takes to decompose. So, again, we haven't dug into, there are some communities that have done an all-out ban on single-use bags. The conversations so far at the city council level are really around plastics and not around paper bags. So,
gotcha. Because one of the things that occurs to me is that, especially when you start talking about reusable bags and things like that, you're talking about solutions and approaches to problems that are probably a lot easier to implement and to afford in places like Aspen and Telluride and Boulder than in less wealthy parts of Colorado.
And that's certainly a piece of the conversation that we need to have is, and especially also when we talk about a city that more and more people are looking to shift modes out of single occupancy vehicles, what happens when you arrive at a supermarket and you rode the bus there and you're picking up your groceries and maybe you intended to use a reusable bag and forgot it at home. And so we're looking at it from an equity standpoint, but there are entire states that have banned single-use plastic bags. And again, each of those bans is different in terms of where it applies, what kind of stores, is it everywhere? What do we do with a mom and pop shop versus a corporate grocer? Kroger, one of the largest grocers in the country, has said that they will phase single-use plastic bags completely out over the course of the next, I think it's 5 years. So I think there are issues and hurdles certainly, but I think it's doable and worth, the hard conversations about how do we solve those problems and move away from these single-use plastics where we can.
All right, so now let's get back to straw. The whole straw thing fascinates me. Okay, and you talked about how it gets into the environment and microplastics in the ocean and the quasi myth of the Pacific garbage island thing. But one of the things we've learned is that an enormous percentage of the plastic that does get into the ocean and the environment is coming from a few rivers in Asia, right? So it doesn't magically get from Starbucks or McDonald's near Wash Park, not that there's a McDonald's very near Wash Park, and somehow start polluting the world. So how do you balance, and you made very clear, I mean, your interest is the environment. It's what you studied. It's what you care about. I get all that. So how do you balance, trying to actually understand the environmental impact of single-use plastic straws, which I would propose in America is approximately zero, with the actual hassle and cost of enjoyment of life? Like, does that matter?
Absolutely, enjoyment of life matters, but I think that, first of all, there are straws on the market today that are compostable at a commercial grade compost facility, which is what we have. And so, for instance, there's a brand new restaurant that just opened up in my district, and they have, if you go in and get, a takeout to-go cup, it is a plastic cup with a plastic straw, but it's all compostable. You can put that in the compost and not in the trash. So this isn't just about paper straws. There are also these, they look like and feel like plastic, but they're not. Products that are emerging, technologies are advancing on that. I think that when you talk about these issues that affect the environment, a lot of it is about broader behavior change and broader awareness. It's very easy to just go through life consuming things and not thinking about it. How many people have ever been to the landfill or the wastewater treatment center or the recycle center and ever seen what happens? What is the end result of the things that we are consuming every single day? Most people think I put it in the trash can and then it just goes away. It disappears. And that's not, I'm not accusing anybody of that. I did the same thing.
Right.
The first time I saw any of those facilities was when I did it as part of my degree program at CSU. But it blew me away that I had never even thought about that. I mean, people who don't, I was once at the St. Patrick's Day parade, and I'm sitting there with my kids on the curb, and this woman who's marching in the parade marches by, and as she's coming by me, throws this piece of trash that she had been holding on to into the storm drain that I'm sitting right next to. So she had the idea that, hey, I shouldn't just litter. I shouldn't just throw this on the street. That's not okay. But I'll throw it in this drain because then it's gone. Every single storm drain in Denver goes directly into our river.
All right, so let me ask you, this is more of a philosophical, and I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure we have time to get another topic or two in. And this plays in a little bit to the earlier question about where do you put yourself along that scale of liberal to conservative. But how do you try to balance the difference between saying, I want to help educate people versus I'm going to tell people how to live their lives by making it so that they can't have a single-use plastic straw or a plastic shopping bag?
I think there is a balance there, and I think that's where you have to look at where are the places where it is appropriate to come through and say, hey, we're just not going to do this anymore, and where are the places where it takes advocacy and education. And there are a lot of really complicated plastics out there. There are single-use plastics that are used in hospitals, that are a lot more complicated than a straw. That, especially when there are replacements for that straw that I would argue you can enjoy life just as much, and it doesn't end up in the landfill, and also changes the perception and the conversation. Look at how many people are talking about single-use plastics because Seattle banned straws.
But we're mostly laughing at them. I mean, maybe not in your circles, and I don't mean this as a jab at you at all, but when we talk about it on my show, right, we talk about, of course, it's Seattle and Santa Barbara or someplace like that are doing this stuff, and most of us think it's ridiculous. I just think, I think if you're going to go down that road, I think you need to come up with you need to market it better than Seattle did, because Denver's not Seattle. Even as liberal as Denver is compared to a lot of the rest of Colorado, it's not Seattle. And I hope that if you start going down that road, you try to explain it to people. And you started today, which is good, better than Seattle did. Let me switch gears because we just have a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
An issue that I know, frankly, very little about, but I saw pop up in the news. Denver looking to prohibit what they call gay conversion therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, that bill will be in committee today, and so it's a ban on a practice for minors where someone would go in with a kid and a therapy practice that purports to convert their, if they are gay convert their sexual orientation. And so there have been efforts at the state to say this practice is not okay and it should not be allowed to be done in our state. And those efforts have failed. We're taking it up as a city to say in the city limits of Denver, that's not an okay practice.
One of the things that I'm trying to understand, and seriously, I don't have an axe to grind on this issue. I really don't know enough. So on the one hand, I think it's not government's job to be a parent. And on the other hand, I do think there is some role for government in protecting children who can't otherwise protect themselves. And I'm wondering what you have seen about this particular practice that makes you think that it is harmful, which would have to be the standard, I think, by which a government could say that a parent couldn't do it. You can't just say, oh, we think it's, it's insensitive to gays. Like, that wouldn't be an okay reason to ban it. So what have you seen that makes you think that this is harmful?
I wish that I had all that right in front of me. Again, it's in committee today.
Okay.
So you're catching it right at the beginning, and you caught me. I didn't know this was a topic. I would have brought some of that research, but I think it's absolutely. I think the evidence is out there that this practice is absolutely extremely harmful and can lead to suicide in very vulnerable populations of our youth, and can really be extraordinarily damaging from a mental health perspective. Is not based at all in any kind of science, and I think is frankly for me I think it's absurd that we're even having to have a conversation about whether this practice should be allowed or not. I think it's horrifying.
Okay.
Personally,
I've got one last question for you. We've got about 1 minute here. As now, you're president of the Denver City Council for the next 2 years? How does that go?
It's a 1-year election. In the past, traditionally, people have served for 2 years.
Okay.
In recent history, but that's been different. There's also an election for all of us in May. So if I don't get myself reelected to the council, then I certainly couldn't be president for another year.
Okay, in 30 seconds, if you were king and you could pick one issue that you're thinking about now that you would like to get passed and enacted into law in Denver, and you could do it by waving a wand just because you wanted to, what would it be?
Oh, boy, that is a tough question. In 30, I think I would wave a wand and I would create a complete bike network in our city. I think that with as much as we're growing, we don't have room to expand roads. Nobody wants the road by them to be expanded, but everybody hates how hard it is to get around our city. And the only way we're going to solve that is by making sure that not that everyone gets out of a car. There are lots of people who can never get out of a car because of their work, because of their preference, because of how they choose to enjoy life.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but the computer's going to cut us off. Jolon Clark, president of the Denver City Council, great to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Is sponsored by Lowe's.
Try to Drive continues this morning. Finally running stall and accident-free along these interstates. South on I-25 still jammed up downtown and real heavy from the Broadway Bridge on down to Texas.